This is SimNews.TV, and you're listening to the iWeekly show. Welcome to the iWeekly show, the premier place for news, headlines, and analysis on all things iRacing, the premier online racing simulator. I am your host for today, Mr. Hashtag Do You Mind himself, Jake Sparey, bringing you the rundown on all things iRacing for the next half an hour. A slow week, you could argue, in iRacing this week. No World Championship events to talk about, but the good news is for next week, we're going to have ourselves a triple bill of exciting action. We're going to have the likes of NASCAR Peak Antifreeze Series, which will be later on this evening as we release this out on a Tuesday. You've got the iRacing World Championship Grand Prix Series coming to you from Indianapolis, the last of the drop weeks available for drivers. And also, finally, you have the likes of the 6 hours of the Glen coming up, which is going to be a beautiful thing to watch. And more often than not, we are probably going to be seeing a different winner in the top half, because I don't see We Are Grip reforming together, the drivers of Will Tregurtha, Lando Norris and Frank Schothorst, to get themselves back going. But we still had some brilliant action over the week, and filming this on the Sunday afternoon that I have to talk about the race that I was just broadcasting on. That's the iRacing Grand Prix Series, which was from Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the same layout that is going to be run on the Saturday. But what a brilliant race that we had there. Action from minute 1 to minute last. You couldn't really tell who was going to win at what stage. But Nicholas Rasmussen does a very, very good job. Must stress, not related to Frederick Rasmussen, who has been blitzing it up with Core Sim Racing, but Nicholas Rasmussen for Gap SRT, solid driving all race long. Didn't put a foot wrong, which I think many other drivers did throughout the event, and I think that the way that he navigated through the field, saw incident after incident happen, picked and chose his moments very nicely. I think Nicholas Rasmussen has shown why he can sometimes be a winner at the highest level in the iRacing Grand Prix Series, and once again, he showed a side of him which really is quite good. I mean, we know how good Nicholas Rasmussen can defend. For those people who watch last season's iRacing Grand Prix Series action, you talk about the likes of, say, Brands Hatch, where he holds off Darry the Corpse of a Ryan Race team for pretty much the entire race. You have to say, at a circuit which is very different in characteristics, although it has a very slow infield section, it has that massive long banking run from turn 12 all the way to turn 1, where you're spending about 25 seconds full throttle, maybe half a minute full throttle. But it comes down to a point of a brilliant race from Nicholas Rasmussen. He wasn't really challenged out in front when he got up to the front, but at the same point, he didn't have that same turn of pace, which could net him maybe race victories in iRacing Road to Pro. I see Nicholas Rasmussen being a driver who probably aims for a top 20 overall. I see him really being a driver who is very good. He can have a very, very good weekend, but he is that sort of driver who really does prey on the weaknesses of other drivers throughout the event. And with only a 16-car grid, basically, for this race, it did mean that maybe talent was a little bit lighter for this event than some others. We didn't see Faro, we didn't see a Roscoe, we didn't see many others. When you got events like Interlagos and Spa coming up, Suzuka, and all the rest, you know, you want to be racing those 5 races, because arguably they're more well-known tracks, they're better tracks to race at, and you've got a better chance of getting a result. But I do want to talk about Jamie Fluke, who was in this race. He crashes out very early on lap 3. Incident with Giuseppe Ragusa of Thrustmaster Movano. And Ragusa, arguably the greatest defender, is going to be his, quote, the Italian driver. And, well, it seemed that Jamie Fluke was not going to be playing that game of, I'm going to sit behind for 50 laps the same way that Isaac Price did, of course, sim racing at Imola. Oh, no. Jamie Fluke missed his braking point, basically, down towards turn number 8, and that big incident caused Giuseppe Ragusa to drop backwards of 8th position, and, well, Ragusa somehow gets no damage from it and continues to make his charge through the field. Now, Jamie Fluke is not the sort of driver who deliberately takes people out. I will stress that straight away with Jamie Fluke. I've had the pleasure of sharing commentary box with him before at Apex Racing TV. And, Jamie Fluke is an honest guy. He's a nice guy. One of the good guys in sim racing, in my opinion. And for Jamie Fluke to make that, I think it was a mistake. It was the first lap with DRS down that section. And I think he just misjudged how much speed he had, broke a bit too late. Rookie error, you could argue, for Jamie Fluke, but one that costs him the race, basically, because it was for the race lead. And had it not been for the lightning start that he had and all the rest of it, it seems that Jamie Fluke's big moment now will be, I've learnt my lesson over 3 laps. It's going to be time to do that next week on Saturday in the iRacing World Championship Grand Prix Series. And ultimately, he's got to go and prove himself again, because that is a horrible incident that we saw. It's not the only one, so I won't single out Jamie Fluke on this, because I think it was Ryan Parkins who did the same thing to Rene Osterkamp. You have to feel that you've got to get everything perfect, and having this race a week before gives certain drivers with black stripes the opportunity to progress. But Ragusa made his way through the field, and he did brilliantly. You thought he may have had a chance to get the race victory, but Rasmussen's pace was too consistent. Final corner, and Giuseppe Ragusa bins it like Ralf Schumacher did. You have to feel for Giuseppe Ragusa. He deserved a second place after all of that, after all that scrapping and fighting and pulling back 7 seconds and making overtake after overtake. And it ends on the final corner with him absolutely battering the safer barrier. Ragusa will pick himself up from it, because he is a character who knows how to really get the most out of him. I hope he doesn't beat himself up over it, but Ragusa, it cost him a podium today. It cost him P2. He lost P3 as well because of Kalistani being so close. And, it just goes to prove to you, racing is not over until the last corner is turned. And for Giuseppe Ragusa, it's a shame to see the Thrustmaster Movano vehicle out, but that's racing sometimes, and you have to bounce back from it, and I'm sure Ragusa will. And speaking of Emil Stanchu, actually, back-to-back second places. Now, the field was weaker than last week at Road America, and Road America, he was beaten comprehensively, but Emil Stanchu is doing very well at the ability to pick a way through any instance. There were 2 incidents on the opening couple of corners. There was the one with Cesare Manzato and Germanton and all them. He picks his way around that. He picks his way around Ragusa and Fluke's incident, and he suddenly starts making positions on drivers like Ugolotti, who drop back towards the end, and before you know it, he's back-to-back second places. He's gaining some very crucial iRating over the last 2 weeks. And if Emil Stanchu can keep on this path, I think he is a driver that people need to be paying attention to. Emil Stanchu is doing a job that not many people can do by staying consistent. And it might be that Gap SRT try and pick him up, because he would be a good fit for the team. It might be a case that he gets picked up by a more well-known team and takes that time to learn and develop and increase his pace, because Emil Stanchu has a lot of potential, as seen by the way that he conducted himself in the racing today. He wasn't afraid to lose a position to gain his overall time during the event. He is a smart driver, and Emil Stanchu will be very beneficial to whoever picks him up. And with that iRacing Grand Prix Series race over and done with, next week that will be heading over to Interlagos. Brilliant race. I'd like to see Orozco back again for his home race and do a really good job with it. I'd like to see quite a few drivers really race this one, because it's a beautiful track, and I think quite a few people have a good opportunity at it. But let's talk Proto GT for a moment, because that was the RaceSpot.TV primetime broadcast on the Friday night. I got roped into that one at the last minute, but really I do want to talk about Proto GT, because it isn't talked about often. It's a series that is very much there. And if you're in the know with Proto GT, you race it. If you're not, you don't. And it really did show that if you know about Proto GT, you drive it. If not, you don't. Because in that event, we only had 2 drivers in the Ford GT2. And that's really disappointing for a series that gets a primetime broadcast. Because obviously, if you want overall glory, you go for the fastest vehicle. That's just simply how humans work. So most people will drive in HPD ARX, otherwise known as the Honda. And really, it seems that GT1 also was a little bit low on the ground, but they had 8-9 drivers they could work around, and Benjamin Gonzalez did beautifully in his Corvette-Aston Martin. Aston Martin? Aston Martin, let's get that one right for a start. But you feel that with GT2, with that Ford GT2, there isn't really much GT2 love out there. And with the introduction of GTE, with GT3 being a hotbed, with the potential announcement of GT4 coming, or being teased by Steve Myers, shall we say, after his trip to England, you feel that with Proto GT, GT2 doesn't get love. Sometimes we see no GT2 cars, maybe one. In this event, we had 2 in the forms of Coten Klotman of Vendeval and Jan-Erik Hofhoff of MSP. And ultimately, Proto GT and GT2 might be a case of the GT2 Ford is a dying breed. And it's a shame. But it might just have to be a case of trying to find another GT2 machine and make it a very anticipated GT2 category. But I don't see that happening. I see GT2 basically being the forgotten car on iRacing. And I'd like to think that every car has a dedicated fan base, but the GT2 probably is the only thing that isn't. So for anyone who is bored and wants to race well, race GT2. Because if you race GT2, you're probably going to win the championship in GT2. So there's an incentive for you. Race GT2. Jake Sparey's tip of the day. But I want to talk about the race in general as well, because it was a good race at the Nürburgring. Very, very cold. But it was a very entertaining race. We had likes of Lennart Rath jumping over pit road by 20k's by forgetting that it's a 60k zone, not an 80k zone. Takes a 15-second stop-go, has the battle with Neil Andrews, championship leader, for 3rd place. In the end, he loses out and gets 4th as Lennart Rath for Pure. Not exactly what he wanted, but I want to talk about Patrick Schneider of MSP Phoenix Racing, because he had a lead of about 25 seconds, 25 to 30 seconds, with 2 laps to go. And nobody sees this on camera, and I don't even see it when I'm broadcasting it. It had to take me till afterwards when I was actually explained to it by Patrick Schneider himself about exactly what happened. But he has a moment, he has an error, he spins the vehicle, he loses 20 seconds or so, and it almost cost him the entire race. Final corner at the Nürburgring, it was running BES WEC layout, so Coca-Cola curve. And his teammate almost takes the rear out away from him. And for a team like MSP, which is so large and has such a diverse pool of talent and abilities, I do think that MSP need to be a little bit careful with that situation, because there's no doubt that MSP Phoenix Racing has some of the best drivers in the world. They've got the likes of Gregory Tanson, they've got the likes of Lucas Jedstad. You talk about Patrick Schneider in this situation. Jan-Erik Hofhoff is another driver. Lucas Gotch, who I know very well. They've got some really, really nice drivers there. You also talk about likes, they've got Frank Biella, who is 5-time Le Mans winner, in their ranks. If you've got Frank Biella in your team, you mean something in sim racing. But that's just the top end. You don't normally talk about the lower end of drivers, and that lower end of drivers really did struggle in the final stages of the event, fell a lap down over an hour and 5 minutes, and with a difficulty in levels of performance. Should MSP Phoenix Racing be a team that really tries to look forward and develop for maybe a different sort of emphasis? Do they look to try and improve their slower drivers and have a really massive core? Because the way that I see things, I see MSP as a team that should be in the form of development, looking to get those slower drivers to try and be as quick as all the rest. Because if they can have 10, 12, 15, 20 drivers at the level of Tansen, Jedstad and co, and Alexander Thebes, another driver I'll throw in, then you have a very, very scary team that can do quite a bit with 5, 6, 7 teams, or they have the option of developing those drivers, handing them off to somewhere else, and really improving the level of sim racing. I think German sim racing and Austrian sim racing is really, really up there with MSP, and they have a great, great platform to work with. And if they can just develop all those drivers that they have sitting on the benches and waiting and maybe a little bit further down, they have a gold mine at their disposal to really elevate themselves in sim racing. But again, it's only going to be 1 week that Proto GT's broadcasted, and it was a good series. It was a very good race, and the big issue it has is exposure. It falls behind and lags behind because it is an older series, because it has older vehicles like the HPD, the GT1s and GT2s, which quite arguably people don't really want to be driving because hype and IMSA is a massive, massive thing right now, because the problem for Proto GT will always be IMSA. IMSA's brilliant. IMSA, with the new Ferrari and the new Fords and the GTE category, it means that, GT1 and GT2 are getting a lot less exposure, and especially at the highest level, at the World Tour events, there's going to be a lot less GT2 that we're going to see. The likes of Le Mans, which, for better or for worse, went quite askew. The first ever 24-hour Le Mans, it was prototypes, it was GT1 and GT2. Instead, it would be prototypes and GTE, which would be taking over to Le Mans. So, in reality, Proto GT has this big issue where not many people drive it. It's the same with Production Cup. It's the same with quite a few things, where people need to be driving Proto GT in order to make it good. Quite often it's just one split. Quite often it's a mix of prototype drivers, which is still quite popular, and maybe a few GT1s, not really many GT2s. But for Proto GT to get forward, either you introduce a second GT2 car into the mix, either that, or you really look to try and promote it as a series. And for Proto GT, it needs that something. And whatever it is, whatever sparks the excitement and the imagination in people, the problem with Proto GT is it's got to try and live up to IMSA, and IMSA right now is the hotbed. It takes over from GT3 as the big hotbed right now, and it's not surprising, but who knows, maybe Proto GT gets big later on. That's something I really would like to see. And talking about things I'd really like to see, I took a look at World's Fastest Gamer and the drivers that they're putting out. I've seen the likes of Harry Jackson, Oval 2909, getting his name out there. I've seen the likes of the Forza driver that's there. I believe it is Orion Malay. You also got that other driver who does well, Project Cars, is it? I don't think it is, but I'm not sure. But the big crucial thing is Bono House, because ultimately Bono House is the big R Factor guy at the moment. We got the F1 YouTuber out the way. We got the Forza out the way. We got the Project Cars out the way. In Elements, you could argue this is two birds with one stone. They get out of the way iRacing and they get out of the way R-Factor. The only other thing you can really say is maybe in those two picks we see another iRacing driver in there, probably Gregor Hutu, I would have thought. Either that or Martin Kroenke. And I think that one of the other announcements is going to be one of the best mobile drivers, because they're announcing that one of the ways of qualifying is going to be through mobile. They haven't released details of that. They've only released really the R-Factor and Forza stuff, but nevertheless, Bono House getting that seat is fantastic for sim racing, because arguably Bono House is the hottest property, right? Is one of the hottest properties right now. Bono House, 5-time FSR World Champion, looks for a better challenge, decides to go to iRacing, wins the Vegas E-Race for $300,000 or what have you, 1 million prize pool. He probably took away around 200,000 of that. But you look at Bono House, you look at all that he's done in sim racing, and you realise that he's probably got another 10, 15 years underneath him to really go and carve out the biggest legacy in sim racing. And it comes down to his iRacing World Championship races. Right now, he is great at racing, but he's just still not at that level of Martin Kroenke. So I want to really work out what Bono House getting a world's fastest game seat does for the championship. Now, for those people who are in the know, many people accuse me of having a tinfoil cap on my head and spouting out complete and utter rubbish for the sake of spouting out complete and utter rubbish. But this world's fastest gamer seat, it does a couple of things. And one of those things is it really may affect House's ability to fight for the championship, because for Bono House, for what he does, for all that he's been very consistent, but he hasn't had himself a P2 or a P1 finish this season, which is surprising for Bono House, because many people expected him to be winning races, and quite simply he hasn't in the first 7. But for Bono House, for what Bono House does as a driver, as a personality, Bono House is a very, very likeable character. Bono House is very quick, but how quick is Bono House when he's distracted? You can argue that he doesn't have to practice anything at the moment, because he's got this automatic seat, and he's got to wait for all the qualifiers to come in before he arguably needs to start practicing, before everything gets itself going. And it may be a long and laboured process for World's Fastest Gamer. It's announced in spring, summer, may not be over until autumn, winter. But for World's Fastest Gamer, for Bono House and his ability to fight for the championship, World's Fastest Gamer is an unnecessary distraction for him. But very crucially for Bono House, it's not a distraction that hurts him in the short term. It may affect him in the long term, come the last races of the season. You look at your likes of around 10s, 11s, and 12s. That's probably where we're going to see Bono House struggle more, because of the fact that he's already qualified and arguably doesn't need to put in that time and effort yet. But it does offer another question, you could argue, and it's the Redline question. It's, what do Redline do? What do they stand for? And how do Redline make themselves the most relevant team in sim racing today? And it does surprise you how relevant Team Redline is. And from my iRacing background, and being someone who focuses very, very heavily on iRacing as a sole focus point, Team Redline have made that their playground for years. They've completely dominated the iRacing World Championship Grand Prix Series over the last 5 years. And even though they're not winning, and even though they're not taking titles, they are still taking some very, very secure results out of the iRacing World Championship with their B team drivers, and you could argue their C team drivers as well. Redline is an elitist team that has all the best drivers, you could argue, and they do very well with the drivers that they have at them. You need to talk about not even iRacing. You need to talk about Redline, though, about their diversity pool, because they are not solely an iRacing team, even though that is where they get their biggest sort of exposure from. Talk about the Project Cars Championship. You talk about the two drivers that they have in there who are putting in time and time again, which is putting in great results with ESL and the like. You know, Redline are not afraid to put in drivers and sign drivers, which gives them the biggest monopoly. Talk about, say, Ben Cornett, who's been bossing it on Assetto Corsa, for example. Ben Cornett used to be all over iRacing, and yet he's the Assetto Corsa guy now. You talk about the likes of the people that you don't talk about. You talk about Gran Turismo, which in itself isn't really a sim, but on Gran Turismo, Redline have a very strong core in there to really make something happen for Gran Turismo. And especially with the announcement of Gran Turismo Sport, they'll be looking to try and bolster and improve that as they look to learn and get better accustomed to it. But I think that Redline, what they do is they have a very broad antithesis, and it also comes into real life with Verstappen, Verschoors, Verhagen. I've talked about this a lot before, and for Team Redline, you know, we've seen already how they are content at times with getting, say, P16 and Blancpain last week. You talk about how Gregor Hutu doesn't race for 2 World Championship races, but then suddenly crops up for Blancpain to have a little bit of a relaxing drive in a World Championship. You know, you do question what Redline is. And I think Redline is ahead of the times. I think they have been the first team to figure out how to make themselves the most relevant sim racing team in the world. Because they are. And that's just a matter of fact. They are the most relevant sim racing team in the world. But what it comes down to is, how many hits are Redline willing to take in the short term to really make themselves, you know, get a better reputation in the long term? And even though it does make a massive stir early on in the short term, with the likes of Gregor Hutu missing 2 races and Bonner House getting this seat and maybe affecting his way to deal with the championship, in the long term, getting 2 drivers, 3 drivers up into this challenge, having a 3 out of 10 chance of actually getting a 1-year contract with McLaren, you feel that Team Redline are the best team to make that happen. And it shows. It really does show that Redline have got everything thought out. They do understand what it takes to be a sim racing team. And any team in sim racing, be it iRacing, R-Factor, be it Automobilista, Assetto Corsa, Project Cars, be it Gran Turismo or Forza or any mobile game or F1 2017, 18, what have you. Anything that you get yourself into in terms of esports, you need to look at the Redline model. Because they do sim racing as a team the best of anyone else. Not necessarily their drivers, but their outlook, their way of maximizing profit, and the way they actually make themselves very relevant. I think every sim racing team needs to turn around and have a look at, because Dom Dewan does that better than everyone else. And on that note, next show is 6 p.m. as per usual here on SimNews.TV. And if you have any questions that you want answered, message me on Twitter at Jake_Sparey, Sparey, or at iWeeklySN. Make sure you subscribe for more content here from all sorts of podcasts and races that we have going on here. And for the time being, I've been #DoYouMind Jake Sparey, and this was the iWeekly Show.